this is a special meeting of the City of Campbell City Council today at 2 p.m. We are doing this as a virtual meeting per the revised orders from the governor. The members of the public will not be able to attend the meeting, but it is being live streamed on YouTube. If anybody from the public wants to make a comment, they are being accepted via email at clerks, CLERKS office at campbellca.gov during the meeting. Please submit the meeting with the title under the subject line for public comment. All right, City Clerk, can we call the meeting to order? Where did she go? I don't see her now. Brian, the City Clerk isn't on the people showing up.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I don't know why I'm not getting you. Okay, go ahead. Roll call.
Okay, Councilmember Waterman.
Here.
Councilmember Bybee.
You're on mute, Ann.
Present.
Councilmember Resnikoff.
Here.
Vice Mayor Gibbons.
Here.
Mayor Landry.
Here. All right, so at this point, we are open to any public comment. City Clerk, do we have any comments?
We do not.
All right, so we now have new business, and this is to adopt a resolution setting forth code enforcement priorities during the COVID-19 emergency. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, we do, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Thank you very much for taking the time to have a special meeting. So why are we having a special meeting? Well, we had an issue come up where a business in downtown Campbell changed operations for a good cause. And when we were aware of what was happening, we talked to the business owner, because in order to change one business to another, according to the code, it requires a conditional use permit. And unfortunately, there's no flexibility to state otherwise, despite the fact that we're in the midst of an emergency, and what the person wants to do or was doing is a good thing. So personally, yeah, staff would support it. Professionally, the code doesn't allow it. So we were trying to figure out ways to see how we can grant greater flexibility here and allowing businesses to switch gears, if you will, during this pandemic. I mean, this is a world global emergency. And one way we can do it is retooling our code enforcement program. And that would allow us to either focus on these types of transformations temporarily or not. We drafted a resolution that explains that. And the interesting thing is we've done that before in the past, back in 2009, where the City Council established priorities for being reactive to certain types of uses and proactive to others. And those aren't codified either. Rather, they're more directed through the City Council's resolution of kind of a, more of a service direction than a code requirement. And we kind of see this is the same way you could do if you choose to provide greater flexibility. Otherwise, it would be a more formal process where you would have to restructure your codes to, grant temporary relief for certain types of uses without going through a cumbersome, discretionary review process. So we wanted to put something in front of you for consideration, and that concludes staff's report. Can't hear you, Madam Mayor.
Sorry, I turned my, City Clerk, do we have any public comments?
We do not.
No. Okay, so I guess we can do questions first or comments at the same time. Want to start in the order of voting? So Rich?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let others talk, but I've got a gazillion questions on this thing. It's sort of a mind angler as to where we're going here. I'm not sure I understand, what we're saying. This is something to do with the pandemic, but I'm not sure why this is after the pandemic. I don't know, as rules change with the pandemic, if some XYZ shop is going to be allowed in 3 weeks and they say, well, I want to sell cameras or I don't know, Gucci watches and handbags, and they want to do that somewhere. I don't know if we're specifying here, is this in the shop? Is this outside the shop? Should they be doing this off the sidewalk so there's not ADA issues? It's a very short write-up here, and I'm just afraid. I don't understand the need for a crisis here when we've got a lot of time to spend, and let's get it right. Thank you.
Okay, I can answer one question, and maybe Paul. This is for essential businesses only. This does not allow a camera shop to open up and be selling. And so the essential businesses are restaurants, grocery stores, and hardware stores, things like that. And you had to have selling 50% of your business has to be essential. So
Right, but that can easily change in a week or 2 or 3.
Right. So we're trying to get through the next couple of weeks now that they extended the order. So right now it's essential businesses. We're basically saying it's a low priority for enforcement. If you are a restaurant now or were a restaurant and you're trying to sell groceries under the code, you weren't allowed to do that. So we're basically saying enforcement will become a low priority, i.e. letting essential businesses that are restaurants sell groceries. I see Paul was shaking.
Yeah, we're exactly. It doesn't
Right.
make sense.
So I'm sorry, Councilor.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So the particular business that started this whole conversation, if you will, was already an essential business. It's a restaurant. Under the order, they can still conduct their essential business. It's takeout food only. It's just that they converted to selling unprepared food. And the city's definition is very clear. That is a grocery store. Therefore, if they want to be a grocery store, they would need a use permit. That's the code. But understanding we're in this sense of, this emergency, does the city council feel it necessary to create a mechanism to allow temporarily these types of good gesture uses in the meantime? Once the order's lifted, then they would need to convert back to whatever their use was. And this is kind of a tool. We just wanted to give you options. So you have the ability to make a decision. And like I said, if you feel this is inappropriate, then don't make the decision. We just wanted to give you a tool should you decide, let's give these business owners greater flexibility.
Do you have more questions, Rich?
Oh, I have lots of questions, but I'll let the next person speak.
Well, I was going to go down through the order. Do you want to list any more questions?
No.
No. Okay. So then Ann?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to understand through the public health order, and I've talked to the city manager a bit about it, is that we essentially have 2 categories of essential businesses. One is our restaurants for the availability of takeout food, and the other is grocery stores to provide essential food and necessities that people need. So the flights is allowed to be opened for an essential business that is a restaurant that is providing food for takeout. And they've expanded that to allow for selling groceries. And it's not just, from my understanding, it's not just unprepared food, but it's also, it goes to like toilet paper and other essentials. And I don't understand if we've got the other category in place where people have the availability to buy those essential items through grocery stores in the city, throughout the city, through takeout, through drive up, through delivery, why the restaurant is allowed to expand their use or their purpose and sell other items. So that's the question I have, and I don't understand the why that would be allowed.
Right, so we Councilor Bybee, we had the same concern as a staff because we're following the code, and the code says if you want to change, you got to get a use permit. But we started hearing concerns from neighbors, we got 3 emails, maybe more, stating, city, you need to be more flexible. And I believe the city manager was having conversations with city council members. So we felt, well, let's explore this as an opportunity to provide greater flexibility without going in and doing a more formal process of updating the code. This is a temporary measure. It's not a permanent fix. So we just wanted to give you options. I think that's one of our jobs, is to explore options and alternatives to see if they work for you. If they don't, then we don't have to do it.
So do you have any expectation that this is going to open up the Pandora's box and then lead to multiple other businesses doing this type of service?
Yeah, I'm still looking for something in writing from the DA's office that states that no new essential businesses can open unless they were already deemed an essential business as of March 16th. So I put a call into the DA's office. They actually never received a question like that before. They were surprised. And I've also reached out to my SCAPO group, and the county person basically feels that, well, no, an essential business can be established anew. So just open Pandora's box. Well, it really depends what the DA says, but we could have businesses wanting to change use to something temporarily as essential if they aren't already. We still need to wait to hear back from the DA's office. The police department feels pretty confidently that if you're not already essential as of March 16th, you can't convert to an essential. But I haven't seen that in writing. I kind of want to see that from the source.
If I can add a little bit to that. First off, Councilmember Bybee, in answer to your question about businesses expanding their operation, the order is actually very specific that they must scale down operations. So a business such as Flights selling toilet paper would be against the order, because that's increasing their business operations by selling additional items that they didn't sell before. The police department is the enforcement side of this health order, and we have been in contact with the DA's office and Santa Clara County Council to get guidance on the legal definition of this order. And as to Director Kermoyan's statement, yes, it is our position that if a business was not an essential business prior to March 16th, then they may not operate at this point until the order changes or ceases to exist.
So if I may follow up with one additional question then. So if the sale of toilet paper, since that's the common topic today of these days, isn't allowed, then is that going to create a greater code enforcement issue policing that if they intend to continue to sell toilet paper?
I guess that
As
goes
part
to
of their-
Gary.
That would go to Gary.
So that's one of the issues we've run into over the last 6 weeks with this order, is that there are a lot of different components and it's not completely clear. So when I talk about the police department being the enforcement side of it, just like any other law, we need to make an interpretation, look at the facts and at the time and make a decision. We're coordinating with the DA's office because they're ultimately the entity that's going to prosecute any criminal violations. So I don't know that that answers your question, but at this point, we're looking at this as an educational component and are trying to stay away from the enforcement side of it and are hoping for compliance from the businesses.
Well, and I guess I'm looking for it, the measure to be as uncomplicated for staff as it needs to be, because you've got a lot of other things to worry about besides a restaurant selling toilet paper on the corner of, downtown Campbell. So I'm trying to weigh it all. So thank you both for your responses.
Okay, Paul Resnikoff.
Yes, thank you. So just to comment first, thank you, Paul, for your explanation, because until I read this, it is fair to say staff did their job, right? The code says you can't deviate, and I know there's a lot of heat for that. So for the record, staff did what staff's supposed to do. So I appreciate that. My concerns, generally very supportive of these things, my concerns are following. I think Councilmember Bybee's points are well taken, are going to raise an issue or two for me. We're not controlling the definition of essential services. So yeah, it's possible that an interpretation, I will say to the chief, is you can't add more essential services, but that's going to be up to the public health department, I think, right? That decides what's essential, is it not? Gary shaking his head no. I mean, the essential services definition from what I read in here came from Clark County Public Health Department is what was I read in the resolution. In their order, identified certain essential services necessary to remain open. Who's defining them when it changes? Health department, governor, who?
So between the state order and the county order, whichever is the most restrictive is the order that needs to be followed. So yes, the Santa Clara County Public Health put out a list of what businesses were essential, and they're able to make changes to that, just like they did earlier this week with the outdoor activities and construction.
Okay, I guess what's confusing me then is, I think you said you don't anticipate more things will be essential or so, but so construction now becomes essential in any kind of construction, right? If I saw it right, but it wasn't a week ago. So it did change.
Only certain types of construction a week ago were
Correct.
considered essential.
I mean, I understand this. The salons are a bad example because we know they're in tier 3, but something else could be moved into this tier 2 and become essential. So this definition could change, right? I thought originally what we were going to do is define maybe businesses that operate as a food and beverage CUP and whatever that means, and focus on that versus focusing on a definition that we don't control. Okay, so that was my thought when I read this. I was surprised to see that we weren't saying specifically businesses that do 50%, whatever that the definition is, would be under this ordinance, this resolution. So that was one thought. Because if the definition changes, then what we permit changes without us having a say. There is something in the resolution that talks about code violations that present a threat to public health or safety. What I thought on that one was addressing, I'm assuming, like ADA. So if we're not addressing it here, taking people off the sidewalks or the streets or public right away, I thought we might be saying if you're in a parking lot or so. I think one of the issues the restaurant was able to do this in Los Gatos simply enough is they're in a parking lot. They don't impact car stopping. They don't impact the sidewalk. And if we're worried about other businesses joining in that might be essential, I don't think we want them all on the sidewalk or all having cars pulling up. So I thought that probably most of the businesses, at least downtown, that would qualify have a public or private parking lot right there, and that maybe that should have been part of it to get them out of the right of way. Just two other comments, I think.
Can I respond to that one though?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, we of course, we always want to leave in there that any type of process or program we create shouldn't harm the public's health and safety, right? So that's why we kept that in there. So the example you gave with Holtz's restaurant, I guess it's called Flights now in Los Gatos. If they were to operate in the parking lot and the amount of success they were generating somehow start backing up into the street, et cetera, we can say, whoa, wait, time out. Although we're allowing this temporarily, your activity is creating a health issue. We now need to address it. So we always leave that in there just in case, you know, there's an.
But to Councilmember Bybee point, that creates, and so if they do this, we'll do it, you know, why not address it all and be with it and say, if you're restricted to this, then that problem doesn't exist. So that's why I thought about it.
It's kind of like a temporary use. It's like a temporary use permit. It's class.
This whole thing may go away in weeks anyway.
Can I add into this? My
Sure.
understanding is you cannot be in a public right of way. So none of these businesses are allowed to be on the sidewalk. And I had asked the city manager yesterday, it does not state that clearly in this. It does not clearly state about this. You had to have been an essential business before March 16th, and it had to have been 50% deemed essential. And then there's nothing about not being in the public right of way. So is that the three things, Paul, that, and Ann, these were the things that you guys were mentioning? Paul, right?
It's certainly that's certainly part of it, I guess. It just, at least the concern. You know, to just read through this, these were just questions that came up, and we should define them, because I think Ann was right that you don't want to then create a situation where code enforcement has to go out and look at it and make a determination. You want to be as specific as possible. So, you know, let me just, I don't want to monopolize here, just two other quick things. I don't remember when we had the discussion of the businesses downtown, what we specifically said or didn't like of grocery stores. I just don't remember. I know it's come up over the years, right? And maybe as a bigger picture, when that comes back, we ought to revisit that. I don't know. I think, am I wrong in hearing Los Gatos says that you can sell, the restaurants can sell prepared food or the ingredients or the unprepared food to cook yourself? I thought I read that Forbes Miller, somebody was making their steaks available, you could cook at home. Is that just that their code is different than ours? Well, you know, or
I really don't know. When I was questioning their staff, I asked the fundamental question: did you run it up the flagpole and check in with your town council? And I never got a response. So I'm kind of guessing it's not codified, in that they're just trying to be creative and tolerate uses that are changing. But when you look at our definition of restaurants, it specifically says what they're selling, food, desserts, and beverage, are to customers in a ready to consume state, which means
right.
You're not getting a head of lettuce wrapped up in plastic on your plate, right? And now you create the salad. No, it's
right.
Okay. Last question, and Paul, this would be for you. I think. When we brought back, I thought we were finalizing the downtown uses. Remember, we got there and we getting close, and then it got kind of mucked up into the Winchester corridor and all that. And we postponed some of this stuff. I think we moved it out to a date uncertain.
Yeah.
Isn't there the ability in what we were doing for some ministerial approvals of some uses that would have been, like, this might have been done that way?
This would have been, yeah.
Sorry?
This would have been a permitted use.
Okay, so here we are again, and you know, at that time we were 8 years into it. We've delayed. I don't know. It's scheduled again. You know, if that would have fixed this problem, then rather than make an exception and fix this problem, I'd like to close out on that and just be done with it, and then you can fix this problem. And then we don't have to do these special meetings. That just to me seemed to be the way it should have been done. And I think we went to a date uncertain, which is not scheduled, and we just kept putting it out. I thought we were there at that time, right after years and years. Wouldn't that solve this problem? And if so,
If it was a
why-
permitted use, then we would allow it.
so if that solves the problem, we could close out on that. I guess, Brian, my question is, that's never come back to us, right? And I know there are other issues we've dealt with. Why don't we get that on the agenda, close out on that, and give, planning to move forward on these issues?
We can move forward with the exception that our publication,
Yeah.
we've got to resolve that issue. So that's not a super quick solution at this point, unfortunately.
Okay. But you see, my point is, if we finalize on those kind of issues, then we don't have these special issues. Anyway,
Right,
that's my,
but the reason the C3 was not, Rich has a question, but the reason the C3 didn't get approved was staff did pull it because the Winchester Boulevard uses, it wasn't clear, what was it, Paul? There was a gym or something, Pilates, and it wasn't in the list. And so the staff pulled it to then fix it, and that's why there wasn't a date certain to come back yet. And also, it's just, the whole issue right now is we can't publish anywhere, and it's adding a CUP.
I understand that issue. Yeah, I think I kind of have a different memory of some of the discussion of why we didn't finalize the thing, but certainly the publishing issue has now made that maybe a moot point. Anyway,
Well,
I
in
mean,
the publish, yeah, we're having this emergency meeting because we could not publish. If we could have
Okay.
published last week, we could have done this. So
I'll
this
see
is
the
kind
floor.
of a
Those
stopgap.
are my comments.
Okay,
If I
Rich
can
had his
just
hand up.
jump in.
Yeah, I mean, listening to,
Even,
Hang
even,
on,
if we
hang on,
could-
Bill.
excuse
Bill
me,
has his
even if we could have taken it last week, it's still 30 days before a normal ordinance to become effective, which would put us out, hopefully outside of well, definitely outside of the existing orders.
yeah, I mean, so I agree with Councilmember Bybee and Resnikoff. I mean, those are good comments and questions. It's, again, going back to what I said originally is, what I understand there's one restaurant and they're, having issues there. I doubt if it's financial issues with all the restaurants we have. I don't expect they're making too much money selling stuff there. So rather than talking a pandemic, it's sort of generically, and I may very well be in favor of saying generically, if a restaurant says, crap, I ordered too much tomatoes and too many radishes, let's sell them out front any day. 5 years from now, we could have a good discussion of whether that should be allowed, will be allowed. If we're saying, no, we don't want that, then we don't want it. I don't think this particular pandemic and one place is selling it. It may make some neighbors happy because it's convenient, but there's a dozen or close to a dozen markets within a mile of that place, from Whole Foods to Trader Joe's and all that. I understand the situation, but that particular restaurant is not the only one in there. If we're going to say, well, police don't make it a high priority, that's fine with that and a lot of other stuff. If a lot of people are trying to sell things on the side now. But I think if we're dealing with things as a council, we should be looking at overall policy is, would we rather allow restaurants and other places also, but restaurants to sell other things besides the restaurant, little shops there. I don't know what part. I'm assuming, Paul Cremorian, you're going to say that a restaurant that accidentally orders too many radishes can't go and sell them on the street, correct? I don't know. Is that a state law?
I would
I
think
think it should be.
Yeah,
So
you gotta
I
go.
think part of the confusion here is that there's a county public health order and then there are the city's CUPs, and they're completely separate from each other. So a restaurant who sells cooked food, meals, is considered an essential business. then I don't know that that's necessarily a violation of the order. It may be of the CUP because that's not the type of food that they're allowed to sell, but that's a separate issue from the public health issue. And when it comes to the enforcement side of it, I think where the difficulty comes, which I believe that the intent of this resolution is that we can focus on the county health side of it and not have to worry about whether a restaurant is selling radishes, because that doesn't rise to the level of essential, non-essential, and the other items in the order.
Yeah, I mean, if we're just discussing, obviously, police resources and what you guys focus on, that's kind of easy for me. But still saying, you know, at this point, we're not really changing our mind that a restaurant should be a restaurant. And until we have time to talk about this properly and properly write it up, we would rather a restaurant that buys too many tomatoes not sell. Go to the back of the store where there's a parking structure and say, who wants tomatoes now or 5 years from now. Thank you.
Okay, let's see, Liz, I guess you're next.
Thank you. So I appreciate the dialogue. So my perspective is that we are in a unique situation. And I think the city wants to support all of its businesses. And I think the city wants to support all the businesses to stay economically viable. And if they need latitude in that economic viability, I think we need to be open to that. So for me, following the county of what's an essential service is the place to start. Serving food from an existing essential services business is the right place to start. And if we have something like a 50% thing, which I'm never quite sure where that comes in, their revenue comes from selling groceries as well as their core original CUP. I'm fine with that. They can give toilet paper away for free. I don't fuss, to be honest. I think if it's less than, if we want to say 50% of their business, I'm fine with that. Again, the goal is to keep our businesses financially viable during this time. It's going to be longer than a month. They're talking restaurants likely won't be open for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. They're going to be the last tier 4 in the governor's statement the other day. So restaurants are going to be hard pressed. So I'm supportive of finding the flexibility in our ordinance to allow businesses that were already essential services to expand into other essential services. And I'll think I'm following the intent here by saying as long as the expansion isn't more than 50% of the core business, and it will be terminated when the emergency ordinance is terminated. Makes that very clear. And also needs the clarity of not doing any sales on public right-of-way. I think that point was well made earlier. And I think the mayor said there were 3 things the mayor needed clarification. And I think I agree with all 3 of what you were saying. So if this is the straightforward, simple way to handle it that is appropriate for PD to be in the position of enforcement, I'm supportive of the city being flexible and supporting businesses.
Okay, so I'm going to summarize the 3 things I mentioned. The first one was you had to have been an essential business prior to March 16th. So you cannot today be a clothing store selling shirts and now put vegetables out in your front and sell vegetables. That was one. The second one was to be declared an essential business. 50% of your business had to have been food, hardware. Okay. The third one was it's not clear where you can do this. This is on your private property. So for instance, Confidential Sushi has a courtyard out front. That's their private property. They could do that. But a clothing or a other restaurant, say Tesaro's, unless they have public or private area, I think they do, you cannot stick your table. For flights for a while had their table right at the sidewalk. So the guy could reach out the window. That was in the public right of way. Okay, so those were the three things that I don't think are clarified. And the questions I asked go back to those three. If I'm a clothing store and I have zero business and I put groceries out in front and sell them, 100% of my business now is an essential business. So that goes back to, if you weren't it before, you can't add it now. The other one was, this is citywide. This is not just downtown. And I got over 25 emails of people complaining. And not only that, all over Nextdoor, I'm not on Nextdoor, but from what I've been told by those 25 people all over Nextdoor, people are complaining that other cities are looking the other way. Other cities are not enforcing, other cities are allowing. Why is Campbell not allowing this? So that's why I called this emergency meeting, as I was getting enough complaints. And then there was issues of, if one store had 2 items of groceries but sold the rest was clothing, they were not considered essential, but they're trying to be essential by selling more. So that's why those 3 things are not clear in this ordinance that I wanted to have clarified. So it needs to be citywide, which it is. Nurseries are now open. They open partially because they sell fruit trees and vegetable stocks or plants. Hardware stores have been open, so Home Depot could sell plants, so they could bring in tomato plants and things like that. So let's see, what else were your guys' questions? I think Anne had the whole thing about toilet paper. I brought up the same issue. If a restaurant, I wanted it to add to say you could sell the ingredients to the food you prepare, which Bill interpreted this and he did what he thought was correct. So if I'm out, and Flights was doing this, is they had hand sanitizer and toilet paper with a lettuce. So is that what we're allowing you to do now? Toilet paper is pretty much essential, but do we want a restaurant selling dry goods and things that they would not be ordering? So these are things that I want to have clarified. Do you guys, Bill, do you have comment, or Paul, Brian?
Yeah.
We can certainly make it more specific. As long as we get clear direction from the council, we can add a bunch of qualifications to it. This was just our first stab of trying to take a broad brush approach that would give some flexibility to staff in enforcing the codes under the current stay-at-home order.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, I think all of those 3 things that were mentioned, I'm a little bit more nervous about us defining what an essential business is in our resolution when that's a county definition. But clearly we can talk about essential businesses as established by the county and defined by the county order as of March 16th. I think if we get into writing an interpretation of that, it makes me a little bit more nervous, but as Bill said, we can do that if the council wants.
I didn't ask for an interpretation. I was citing the 2 things that I cited first were the county defined essential businesses, and you had to be one before March 16th, and 50% had to be under the definition of the county as essential. So what I was trying to get into this ordinance is just that clearer definition.
Gotcha.
So that, okay, and the third one was our part of, you don't get to do this in the public sidewalk, or you don't get to stop cars out in the middle of the street and hand groceries into their window.
The county public health order actually addresses the drive up issue and prohibits any drive-by pickup operations from essential businesses.
So they cannot, because like what was happening before, the table was on the sidewalk, the guy would park and reach out the window and be handed the groceries or the foods. So that to me was clearly not allowed under the county order. Is that, you're shaking your head yes?
Yes, I agree.
So I'm going to go back through, we've lost Liz's picture. I don't know if she's still there. She's on mute. So let's go back. Rich, do you now have any more questions or comments?
Just a final comment. I mean, I don't mean this to sound mean or anything. I certainly, I'll go ahead and support it. Everybody else is behind it. I'm not happy. You know, this is kind of addressed to you, Mary. If we're getting stuff on Nextdoor and that's what, or email, and that's how we're judging what to have as emergency sessions, we're all going to kind of go crazy here. So we got to be careful throttling things based on Nextdoor input. There was a little bit of noise I saw, but and I think it was a campaign by certain, but whatever. These things happen. I think we got to be careful and be thoughtful and be looking, as we always should, at long-term policy decisions and not going through fire drills like this. So thank you.
Okay, and I am responding to 25 emails. Those people
Even if it
told
was
me that,
200, it wouldn't change.
and there are other issues that have come up, but I felt that this was a public service. It does go to essential business, so that's why we're here. Okay, so next was Ann. Do you have any more questions or comments?
I don't have any more questions. I do have a couple comments. And I just want to say that under normal circumstances, I wouldn't necessarily agree with this approach. That said, we're in unprecedented times right now. We have something that's caused anxiety, not only for businesses, but for staff and for residents and all of us. And I know many of the businesses are worried about their day-to-day viability as well as their long-term sustainability. So what we can do to help them, I'm very aware of. And so for me, it comes down to two things. If this helps to support local businesses during a crisis, I would support it. If it helps staff provide the flexibility they need to provide code enforcement services and enforcement during a crisis. And it sounds to me that the staff really is supporting this. I would be willing to support it, again, as a temporary measure only to address a crisis that's happening now.
Hey, Paul?
That's what I have.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
agree. Okay, you done, Ann?
I'm sorry, Ann, did I cut you off?
Well,
Okay,
there's a delay, so it's tough to catch up. I agree with what you said, and I'm happy to support businesses. I hope in a month that this doesn't matter and it goes away, and maybe we should have a discussion at some point on the bigger thing. I just want to comment that Councilmember Waterman took the words out of my mouth. I mean, I understand you got a bunch of emails, and I got 3. But the reason you got emails is because somebody went on Nextdoor and said, email the mayor and tell her this. I just looked just to see, there are 21 comments total on Nextdoor about this. There are many of the same people going back and forth. So let's take half of that, 50. It's a relatively small thing. That doesn't mean it's not important, and it's not certainly important to them. We have to be really careful moving forward saying, this is a major issue for the city because 10 people want it. That's 10 out of 43,000. There's a bigger issue here. I'm not, and I'm going to take some heat for that probably. I don't mean to say their issues are not important, but we have to be careful how we address that. And when I hear not everybody's on Nextdoor, and I'm certainly not on it a lot either, but just to look, this would, you know, somebody puts up there and says, I'm tired of the sheltering in place, and it gets 200 comments. This is really minor in the scheme of things, as it turns out. But I'm willing to support the business. I think Councilmember Bybee pegged it. It's a temporary thing. It's a unique situation. I don't like the way we're doing this. I don't like the process. And maybe we can figure out down the road how to do this better in an emergency. But I'm willing to support it for the sake of the circumstances we're going through with the conditions that you added putting on.
With the 3 comments.
Yeah, with getting off the street, and all that, and limiting it so that it doesn't explode, and we don't have, I'm a retail store and I sell shirts, but I'm not selling shirts, but buy a gross of strawberries and you get a free shirt. You can get around anything you want if you want to do it that way. So with the right conditions in there, but I guess the takeaway that Councilmember Waterman said is correct. Let's be careful.
Yep.
Definitely put weight to what people send us as info, but that's not indicative of this, how big an issue it is.
Okay, Liz?
Thank you. So I think Councilmember Bybee summarized things well. I support everything you said. I do agree with Councilmember Resnikoff and Waterman that we don't want to set a precedent with responding. But I think your comment, the mayor's comment was quite relevant here. There's more than one business doing it. I personally know of 5 businesses, and I'm willing to bet there's probably a lot more that I just haven't personally experienced. So it is a broader community-wide issue. And we do have a problem with some people trying to break the rules. And I think it's important that we have clarity and consistency. And I think the 3 conditions that you've mentioned, Mayor, are the right ones. You had to be an essential business to start with. It's not on public right of way. And that it's 50%, not more than 50% of the business. I think those are the right clarifications. And I do think that it's important to support all of our businesses to the best ability we can. And this seems appropriate under these extreme circumstances.
Madam Vice
Brian?
Mayor. point-
Oh, Brian was raising his hand, Paul.
Yeah, Madam Mayor and members of the council, if I can too, as I hear us getting more specific, I'm nervous that we may be boxing ourselves a little bit in a corner with regard to compliance with the county order. And perhaps in addition to those suggestions, maybe an additional condition would be requirement that the essential business continue to operate in compliance with the county health orders, or that nothing in this ordinance shall overrule or waive the requirements of the county health officer. Because what I hear from Gary is there's some concern about essential businesses expanding their use. And we'll want to make sure we're clear to businesses that they can't expand their businesses. They can continue to operate and they can operate other essential businesses, but they can't necessarily expand that.
If that's
Okay,
a-
Hang on a second, Liz. Paul Kamoyan had a comment of your, what you had asked already, Liz. Paul Kamoyan has an answer or question.
Well, it was more of a clarification. It was kind of in line with what Brian was saying. You know, I see this as 2 separate things. There's the public health officer order, and what this resolution is doing is trying to address our local ordinance. So what you, council, are talking about is how comfortable are you with an existing established essential business changing to another type of essential business? And what you're saying is that it can't be more than a 50% change. If it goes to 100% change, you're uncomfortable. So what my question is, what do you mean by the business? Is it inventory, floor area, or profit? Yeah.
So Paul, my statement, what Brian said maybe starts with what these other 3 things were. And so it wasn't, Liz said 50% maximum,
I'm
but
just,
what the county ordinance, according to Gary and Paul, the county ordinance said minimum of 50% had to be with essential services.
It actually,
So that's right. Sorry, Gary, go ahead.
for clarification, the order uses the word substantial, and the district attorney's definition of substantial is
Okay.
50% or greater.
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. So to address the comments about why are we doing this with only 20 people complaining, this is not the only issue that people are complaining about, but I felt that this served the public. And the emails that I got were from citizens. The comments, either verbally or through the grapevine, were other businesses complaining also. Why do they get to do that and I can't? And because of the Brown Act, I'm not allowed to talk to all 5 of you. So I felt this was important today. And it's not going to set a precedence from my perspective. This is a critical issue to me. I think Anne said a very best that there is a lot of anxiety, and that if this ordinance helps support the community and businesses, because it's supporting the community that's complaining, why can't I go and pull up to the restaurant, get out and get a grocery? Why do I have to stand in line an hour at Trader Joe's? So we are trying to help support not only the community, but the businesses. And then also if this helps staff. And so if Gary's group is enforcing things, this is basically what we're saying today is this is the lower priority. Go and do enforcement on, like say, businesses that are opening that are not essential. So I think the comments have been very good. Do we have any other discussion or do we want to take a motion?
I would make a motion.
Okay,
And I may need the city attorney's help on how to tweak the language if we need to, based on the city, your summary, the city manager's last statement and the three clarifications you requested. I would say that the city council adopt the attached resolution setting forth code enforcement priorities during the COVID-19 emergency. Is that right? I got the right page?
yes,
Okay, with the clarification of the business must be essential per the county health orders as of March 16th. To that the sales do not take place on public right-of-way. 3, that it meets the county definition of essential services. I think that addresses Chief Berg's comment about what the definition of essential services is. And the county attorney's definition. Is that okay with Chief Berg? Okay. And then what the city manager said.
well, I think you did that by rewording what I had said. You
Okay.
reworded it to say the county. Okay,
Okay.
are you finished?
Yes.
Do we have
if
a
I may-
second?
Clarification
sorry.
from the city attorney.
Yes, if I may ask for one more clarification, there was some discussion about limiting them to selling products or materials that they were regularly using in their business prior to, say, March 16th, 2020. Is that something that anyone wanted as part of the motion?
Yes.
Then, Mayor, you'll have to explain that. I don't understand what you're aiming at there.
I can't be a restaurant and all of a sudden start selling gardening tools. The whole point was,
So if I may, I think that's already addressed in the comment that they have to be an essential service as of March 16th. And that does not allow them.
Well, actually, I think the concern, well, what if they started selling gasoline? I suppose we could get to that through the health and safety requirement. But there are a lot of other essential services. For instance, landscaping is recognized as an essential service. Could they start offering landscaping services? I think that's what the mayor was trying to get at, if I'm right.
So may I ask for some language that you'd like to clarify what we're trying to achieve?
Yeah,
that was
I
what Bill
thinking-
said was, so go ahead, Bill.
I was thinking you could just add an additional bullet point that the additional products offered had to be products or materials that were in regular use by the business prior to March 16th, 2020.
That's a good language. I accept that.
Okay, now do I have a second on the motion? I don't see anybody seconding the motion. Ann, Paul,
I'll go ahead and second it.
okay. So roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Waterman,
Aye.
Councilmember Vibe,
Aye.
Councilmember Resnikoff,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Gibbons,
Aye.
Mayor Landry.
Aye, thank you, everybody. It's a small baby step, but it's progress in the forward direction. Okay, so that is our items that were on the, let me see here, let me go back to our agenda here. I see Council Member or Vice Mayor Gibbons has raised her hand. Do you have something?
I do, thank you. I'm picking up on the conversation we had here today And I would request that the council have, and I think this can be a very short extra meeting, to do an urgency ordinance. I asked the city attorney for a clarification of what it is that we can and cannot do without publishing. And I can read you his response. My concern is the timing and being unable to do certain things. And his recommendation as an alternate was to do an urgency ordinance. So I asked for a status. So he said, I'm currently, Bill, can I read this? This isn't confidential, right?
Yes, it is. It is confidential, but.
Okay, can I summarize it?
But essentially, I think the point you're making is while a regular ordinance has to be published in order before it can become effective, an urgency ordinance becomes effective immediately, although it still has to be published. It's supposed to be published within 15 days, but regardless of when it's published, it becomes effective immediately. It's adopted by a 4/5 vote and has to have certain findings relating to the urgency of the matter.
And the urgency of the matter is the fact that we don't have a legally accepted publishing mechanism. So and we discussed all of that today. So I'm suggesting that we have an urgency ordinance prepared such that we can continue to do the business of the council until such time as a replacement system has been implemented. So
Okay,
asking
I'll
for
just
that.
ask first before we take a second or a vote. Bill, have we have any update on going to court about the paper?
We will probably hopefully we'll file by tomorrow and get into court sometime next week.
Okay, so.
There's
I'll
no
also-
guarantees of when that's going to happen.
Right, so now I'm back to Liz. You have asked for a motion to have an emergency ordinance.
Urgency.
Urgency ordinance to allow us to do certain types of things without having to publish.
Yeah.
That's the urgency ordinance that you're
No.
asking.
No,
Okay,
to allow an urgency ordinance that defines how we can publish, right, Bill?
No, an urgency, we can't do that by urgency ordinance. We can
Okay.
take specific actions on specific topics under by way of an urgency ordinance. We can't abolish the publishing requirement by urgency ordinance. That's a requirement of state statute.
Right. So let me clarify then, because when I asked my question, I may not have asked it accurately. What I'm trying to do is get us out of the bind we're in, because we don't know when you're going to be able to resolve the situation with the court, and two, we don't have an alternative method in place, and that doesn't go into effect until after the court decision. So rather than hold ourselves up. So are you saying that we have to have an urgency ordinance for everything business individually an urgency ordinance for every action we want to take?
For everything that requires an ordinance, if you want to do it without having to publish before it becomes effective, you would have to do an urgency ordinance on that specific subject.
Okay, so that's what I misunderstood. I thought we could do an urgency ordinance that would allow us. So, okay, so I will take my motion back, but I would request the city manager and staff not wait for things that need to be done, and if necessary, put together an urgency ordinance at the time those issues are brought forward. Right, Bill?
You could do that. Yes.
well, and that's kind of what we're doing today. They're calling it an emergency ordinance, but that was what our goal today is basically do this under urgency or emergency, but it was a specific topic.
Well, so
Okay, Paul Resnikoff, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, I think the question was answered, but let me just check with Bill and Brian. So there is a mechanism to bring forth any item we like to bring forth that would otherwise require a newspaper publication. Is that what we're saying? So if you deem something needs to be on the agenda, it can happen, but it's going to happen each time something needs to be on the agenda. Is that correct?
Correct.
It's great. You're both nodding and you're next to each other.
Yeah.
We're
So
bubble.
that was my question, because when I raised my hand, my thought was, what does this do for us? And in fact, it sounds like staff has the mechanism that's needed to bring forth anything of importance to us. We'll just wind up doing multiple emergencies if we have to.
And
Get them all. Yeah.
the reason I brought up the question was at the meeting the other day, it sounded as if we couldn't do anything.
Right, I understand, right.
So that's why I asked.
And like I said, my question was, how are we gonna do these? And you answered it. There is a mechanism, creates a little extra work, but Bill, you're still working in the meantime to clear that whole issue. So that way too.
Okay.
Right, and I had asked the city attorney, I think, or if not Brian, about force majeure, where the things are an act of God, like in construction contracts, you can get out of provisions because of a force majeure. And I didn't know if we could do something like that to get around the lack of ability to publish. And this was kind of what Bill and Brian came up with as a way to get this passed and through, so we can get the help and support of the community and staff. So that was where we were at. Okay, Ann?
So I would like to suggest that while the court process is going on, and we sort of spoke about this at the executive session, that staff be working on alternative publication or identifying an alternate publication source. There's not a whole lot out there. There's probably the Campbell Reporter, which is part of the Silicon Valley newspaper group, the San Jose Mercury, and maybe one or two others, and that be a tandem process, so that maybe by May, the second meeting in May, we have some recommendation as far as what our new publication is going to be. I mean, there's nothing to preclude that from happening. Is that correct, Bill?
Yes, yes. And in
support
fact, I know.
I see you
we
shaking
are
your head,
working
Bill.
on that. I just today sent the list of adjudicated newspapers to the city manager and city clerk, so that they have that list and know what is actually available to us.
Okay.
Okay,
So
all right.
I
Do we
have,
have any, oh, Ann, I'm sorry, Ann, were you finished? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yes, I was finished. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, there is a lot of cutout in here, so I'm trying to watch your face to see if you're still talking. Liz?
okay, I have two more motions that I'd like to make. And the first one is that at our priority discussions on Tuesday, we did not get to the priorities for next year. And I think we need to have that discussion before staff puts a proposal before the council on May 22nd. So I'd like to suggest that we have a brief meeting, an hour probably, just to make sure we've covered the priority next year.
Okay, do I see a second on that motion?
Okay,
Anybody?
okay.
Clarification
Ms.
of the city manager. I thought we were going to follow up or include that in the next budget study session.
Brian, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. We were planning to include a follow-up on the priorities as part of the next study session as well.
And do we have a date for that?
It's May 22nd.
So the reason I'm making my motion request is that staff will already have done a great deal of work without having the benefit of council giving council's thoughts on the work for next year. All we did on Tuesday was discuss last year's work and the status of last year's work. We did not discuss anything going forward in fiscal 2021. So staff will be guessing.
Okay, do I hear a second on this motion? I don't see a second coming on that one.
Okay, and then the third one is that we have never completed staff reviews of senior staff. And I realize that the timing is not great right now, obviously, but we need to not lose track of what we haven't completed. So I would like to request I think we could do this on Tuesday's meeting with an agenda modification as to have an executive session just to confirm the status of senior staff reviews, the next steps in the schedule, so that they can be completed in a timely and appropriate timeframe. But there's significant outstanding topics that need to at least have a process in place to bring to closure.
Okay, I have a question to Brian and or Bill. If we get a second and a vote on this, can it get on to the May 4th, have executive session? Are we too late in the noticing?
That sounds like a Brian question.
We can add with 72-hour notice. So by Saturday, we can add an agenda item if that's the pleasure of the council.
Okay, so we have a motion.
24 hours, just so you know, it's 24 hours by the governor's motion.
I see a hand up by Paul Resnikoff.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand. This is to find out where we're at. I know we have some things to do to find out where we're at. If that's the case, Brian, I assume you could send us an informational memo updating what's been done, what needs to be done, and then we schedule those. Do we need a meeting to get that information from you?
I would be glad to send the council an informational memo if that's their pleasure, or however you want to handle this. But
I mean, to me, you could give it, we just need a status update. I don't know, we need to devote a study session to getting that info if you can provide it for us. So I would just.
So if I understand what Liz is asking, is we have performance reviews that have not been finished for the executive staff. And that this was to help get to the finalizing those performance reviews. So one thing Brian could send out about the process and where we're at, but the final thing is, when do we close out the performance reviews?
Right,
Is that correct?
Excuse me, is this for two people? Are we talking about the city manager, city attorney?
I thought we finished
Right?
the city
That's all those
attorney
we do.
review. Didn't we
So
finish your
certainly
review,
we
Bill?
Get an update, we get an update, and then if there needs to be a meeting, send out a doodle and we'll sign up for a meeting.
Okay, so there is a motion on the floor. Is there a second on this motion? I don't see any second on the motion. So
If I may, Madam Mayor, I would request
hang on, Anne was raising her hand. There was a little lag delay there.
I was just going to ask, one of the delays in this process has been that the council was supposed to receive some objective criteria on which to further the evaluation. Is it possible to get a draft of that? I know that the consultant had provided it to Brian, and he was at some point going to provide it to the council. Could we get that to review individually, and then at some point schedule a meeting?
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be in conjunction with the city council regular meeting. It's a lot easier these days to be able to schedule a meeting by Zoom, and maybe that would further the process. I'm deferring to Brian. Is that something that you would be able to do?
Yes, we'd be prepared to do that. It was just about complete in the first place when this got suspended. So yes, we could pick that back up and I could provide that information to the council.
Can you give us a date certain?
Everything else in these days when things are so busy, eminently, probably within the next week, I think I could do that for sure.
So by, let's see, where's my calendar here? Let me look, where's the date here? So we have a meeting on May 5th. So is May 8th the Friday or the following Monday? That's about a week out. We could say May 11th. And that would be in preparation for the May 19th, the council meeting, if we potentially wanted to add it to May 19th. Does that work, Brian, May 11th?
That works for me.
Okay, does that help, Liz?
yes, thank you very much.
We didn't get a second, so Okay, anybody have any more comments? Is Brian, are you raising your hand? No, I saw a hand. Where's my hand here? Okay, if no one else has any more comments, then the meeting is adjourned to our next meeting is Tuesday, May 5th at 7 o'clock. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have-
Thank
Oh,
you.
I'll just, yep, okay, thanks. Bye.
All right, live streaming is stopping.